Hello, everyone. Dr. Mad here. Let's get mad about A Christmas Carol. So we're almost finished Stave 3. This is where we left off. So let's just carry on. I was only going to say, said Scrooge's nephew, that the consequence of his taking a dislike to us and not making merry with us is, as I think, that he loses some pleasant moments which could do him no harm. I am sure he loses pleasanter companions than he can find in his own thoughts, either in his mouldy old office or his dusty chambers. I mean to give him the same chance every year, whether he likes it or not, for I pity him. He may rail at Christmas till he dies, but he can't help thinking better of it. I defy him. If he finds me going there in good temper year after year and saying, Uncle Scrooge, how are you? If it only puts him in the vein to leave his poor clerk £50, that's something. And I think I shook him yesterday. Okay, so um, this long sentence is a bit confusing because it's long, but basically just saying that the result of him not liking us, not coming and having fun with us, is simply that he just loses a few pleasant moments, which could do him no harm. And also, this sentence is a bit confusing, but it's basically just saying the same thoughts that by not coming here and enjoying pleasant moments with us, he sits in his office or his room with his own thoughts, which are probably not very happy thoughts. And then here he's saying, I'm going to go to his, I'm going to go and see him every year, whether he likes it or not, because I feel sorry for him. And Scrooge might complain and protest about Christmas until the day he dies, but he will think better of it. And I challenge him not to think better of it if I carry on going every year in good humor and asking him how he is. And then last here, he's saying, and even if all that achieves is to put him in the inclination, the mood to leave his poor clerk, his employee, Bob Cratchit, £50 in his will, he means, not as a Christmas present, because £50 would be more than the clerk makes in a whole year. So even if Scrooge does that by the nephew visiting him every year, then the nephew will have achieved his purpose. And then here he's suggesting that he affected Scrooge in some way. Now, they're going to laugh at that, and rightly so, because we know that he didn't really, not at that point anyway. Obviously, after that visit, things do happen and he does change, but not because of the nephew, really. Not at that point. It was their turn to laugh now at the notion of his shaking Scrooge, but being thoroughly good-natured, and not much caring what they laughed at, so that they laughed at any rate, he encouraged them in their merriment and passed the bottle joyously. And so, yeah, they laugh at the idea that he affected Scrooge in any way, but being good-natured, so that's the nephew, he doesn't mind the fact that they laughed at him, and in fact, he kind of encourages them to keep laughing, and they carry on drinking. After tea they had some music, for they were a musical family and knew what they were about when they sang a glee or catch, I can assure you, especially Topper, who could growl away in the bass like a good one and never swell the large veins in his forehead or get red in the face over it. Scrooge's niece played well upon the harp, and played among other tunes a simple little air, a mere nothing, you might learn to whistle it in 2 minutes, which had been familiar to the child who fetched Scrooge from the boarding school, as he had been reminded by the ghost of Christmas past. When this strain of music sounded, all the things that ghost had shown him came upon his mind. He softened more and more, and thought that if he could have listened to it often, years ago, he might have cultivated the kindnesses of life for his own happiness with his own hands, without resorting to the sexton's spade that buried Jacob Marley. Okay, so after tea, they have some music. I mean, this is fairly straightforward. They sing these songs. Don't worry too much about these two. They're just types of song. If you want to look them up, you can do that. And Topper, who's a good singer. So this word here is pronounced in two ways. So bass, if you're talking about music, and bass if you're talking about the fish. And he could sing without going red, in other words, without effort. The niece plays the harp very well, and she plays this little tune. And she's so this child here who fetched Scrooge, who was that? That's his sister. Okay, so the sister was playing that tune, and obviously, so the sister of the nephew, whose wife this is now. So it's possible that she may have learnt it from the mother before she died. So Scrooge's sister died after giving birth to her the child, to Fred. And which obviously he was reminded by the ghost of Christmas past when they went to visit his old school. And when he hears this music, all of that comes back to his mind and he gets softer and softer. And he thinks that if only he had heard that music more often, in other words, maybe visited his nephew and niece more often, and therefore he would have heard this music, he might have become softer and kinder without. Now, this line here is confusing, but it means that so he obviously helped to bury Jacob Marley, and Marley then turned into a ghost and came back, and everything that's happened since then, right? So Scrooge is becoming softer and kinder because of these experiences, but he's thinking that if he had listened to this music more often, if he had visited his family more often, he wouldn't have had to wait for Jacob Marley's ghost to come back and tell him, and for these spirits to come back and tell him and remind him. But they didn't devote the whole evening to music. After a while they played at forfeits, for it is good to be children sometimes, and never better than at Christmas, when its mighty founder was a child himself. Stop! There was first a game at blind man's buff. Of course there was, and I no more believe Chopper was really blind than I believe he had eyes in his boots. My opinion is that it was a done thing between him and Scrooge's nephew, and that the ghost of Christmas present knew it. The way he went after that plump sister in the lace tucker was an outrage on the credulity of human nature, knocking down the fireirons, tumbling over the chairs, bumping against the piano, smothering himself among the curtains. Wherever she went, there went he. He always knew where the plump sister was. He wouldn't catch anybody else. If you had fallen up against him, as some of them did, on purpose, he would have made a feint of endeavouring to seize you, would have been an affront to your understanding, and would instantly have sidled off in the direction of the plump sister. She often cried out that it wasn't fair, and it really was not. But when at last he caught her, when, in spite of all her silken rustlings and her rapid flutterings past him, he got her into a corner whence there was no escape, then his conduct was the most execrable. For his pretending not to know her, his pretending that it was not necessary to touch her headdress, and further to assure himself of her identity by pressing a certain ring upon her finger and a certain chain about her neck, was vile, monstrous. No doubt she told him her opinion of it, when, another blind man being in office, they were so very confidential together behind the curtains. Okay, so this next long paragraph again is just Dickens painting a picture of a happy family and friends. You don't really need to worry about analyzing it as such, but it's good to understand what's going on. So they don't spend the whole evening on music, they play games. So forfeits are party games because Dickens says, oh, it's good to be like children sometimes, and especially at Christmas when its mighty founder, who's this? So Jesus Christ himself was a child then at Christmas, obviously when he was born. And then they play blind man's buff, which children play nowadays as well. Somebody's blindfolded and has to catch the people. Can't actually remember how it's played exactly. And then Topper pretends to be blind, right? And this sentence here is sort of interesting actually in a contextual manner. So it's saying that Topper and Fred, so they're friends, and they've kind of agreed that the niece's sister is going to marry Topper. So in those days, we can assume that those girls' father is not around. He's probably died because people used to die young in those days. In which case, the next nearest male relative would kind of behave like the father. So they've agreed. I mean, that sounds strange, isn't it? That they kind of agree. But obviously, even nowadays, yes, couples agree between themselves, but you still want to make sure that the family are in agreement. Otherwise, it can be a bit difficult. Anyway, so they've agreed that, and it would have been done with the niece's permission or the niece's sister. Okay, so they've agreed that Topper's going to marry the plump sister, and the ghost of Christmas present New Year too as well. And he keeps on going after the plump sister. Outrage means something terrible, but Dickens uses lots of words to mean terrible in this paragraph, but he's using them humorously. He actually means the opposite. So he's saying that nobody would have believed that Topper was couldn't really see. So he's probably looking from underneath the the thing around his eyes, and he knocks down these fire irons, tumbles against the chairs, bumping against the piano, smothering himself, covering himself with the curtains. So wherever she went, he went after her. He always knew where she was, and he wouldn't catch anybody else. And even if somebody fell against him, he would pretend to get hold of them. But everybody knew. So affront means to insult, but again, humorously, that to pretend that he didn't know what he was doing would be an insult to your understanding. So in other words, everybody knew exactly what he was doing, and then instead he was sidle off, means move sideways towards the planet's sister, and she cried out that it wasn't fair, but again, she doesn't mind really. She likes it. Um, and then when he catches her, rustlings are the soft noises that clothes make, and she tries to run past him. So this means like floating, but he gets her into a corner where she couldn't escape. And then his conduct, his behavior was execrable, meaning terrible, horrible. But here doesn't really mean that. It means the opposite. And he pretends not to know her, that he has to touch her headdress, whatever she's wearing on her head, to make sure that, to find out who she is. But he knows very well that it's her. And then, in fact, they get engaged. He gives her a ring and a chain for her neck. And Dickens says it's vile, monstrous, horrible, nasty, evil. But again, just being funny. And then, no doubt, she told him her opinion of it, so implying that she was angry, but actually the opposite. She wasn't angry at all, because so this is when somebody else becomes the blind man, and these two are being romantic and private together behind the curtains. By the way, buff also means to hit. So in those days, people would kind of push the person who's playing the blind man, but just in fun. Okay, Scrooge's niece was not one of the blind man's buff party, but was made comfortable with a large chair and a footstool in a snug corner where the ghost and Scrooge were close behind her. But she joined in the forfeits and loved her love to admiration with all the letters of the alphabet. Likewise at the game of how, when, and where, she was very great, and to the secret joy of Scrooge's nephew, beat her sisters hollow, though they were sharp girls too, as Tupper could have told you. There might have been 20 people there, young and old, but they all played, and so did Scrooge, for wholly forgetting in the interest he had in what was going on, that his voice made no sound in their ears, he sometimes came out with his guess quite loud, and very often guessed quite right too, for the sharpest needle, best Whitechapel, warranted not to cut in the eye, was not sharper than Scrooge, blunt as he took it in his head to be. Okay, so just saying here, Scrooge's niece didn't play blind man stuff for whatever reason. She just sat and watched. Snug means kind of warm and comfortable, and where the ghost and Scrooge are. But she joined in with the other games. And this line here, loved her love to admiration, that's a bit confusing, but basically she's saying, as we'll find out, that obviously her love is her husband, right? And the way she plays makes him admire her. Okay, so these are all the different games that they play with all the different letters of the alphabet. So here's another game that they play. We don't need to worry about it, how they play it exactly. She's very good at it. And the nephew, her husband, liked the fact that she beats her sisters hollow. She's better than her sisters. So in other words, he's got the best sister, right? Even though they were sharp too, as Topper could have told you. And then, so just saying here, there were 20 people in the party. They all played. And then Scrooge starts to play along. Now, obviously, the other people can't see him, can't hear him. The ghost has brought him there by magic, but he joins in and he kind of almost forgets really that they can't see him because so this line probably just means that he's forgotten that he's there to be taught a lesson, right? He's literally just now enjoying himself and he doesn't he forgets they can't hear him. So he says his guesses out loud and quite often he gets it right. And this line here is a little bit confusing, but a bit clearer if you understand that in those days, Whitechapel had some factories, metal working factories, and produced some of the best metal work, including some of the best needles. And Dickens is saying that Scrooge was as sharp as any of them, was as clever as anybody. So obviously a metaphor, and we know Scrooge is clever, right? He's a businessman. And then this is a like a pun, blunt as he took it in his head to be. So on the one hand, he's sharp in terms of being clever, but blunt as in being rude to people. Okay. I mean, you don't really need to worry about all this. It's just, like I say, Dickens painting a picture of people being happy as compared to Scrooge, who has cut himself off from all humanity. The ghost was greatly pleased to find him in this mood and looked upon him with such favour that he begged like a boy to be allowed to stay until the guests departed. But this, the spirit said, could not be done. So this is fairly straightforward. The ghost is happy to see him like this, and Scrooge begs to be allowed to stay to the end, but the spirit says no. Here is a new game, said Scrooge. 1 half hour, spirit, only one. So he's almost behaving like a child now, isn't he? Like it says there. It was a game called Yes and No, where Scrooge's nephew had to think of something, and the rest must find out what. He only answering to their questions yes or no, as the case was. The brisk fire of questioning to which he was exposed elicited from him that he was thinking of an animal, a live animal, rather a disagreeable animal, a savage animal, an animal that growled and grunted sometimes, and talked sometimes, and lived in London, and walked about the streets, and wasn't made a show of, and wasn't led by anybody, and didn't live in a menagerie, and was never killed in a market, and was not a horse or an ass or a cow or a bull or a tiger or a dog or a pig or a cat or a bear. At every fresh question that was put to him, this nephew burst into a fresh roar of laughter and was so inexpressibly tickled that he was obliged to get up off the sofa and stamp. At last, the plump sister, falling into a similar state, cried out. Okay, so this game, so Scrooge's nephew has thinks of something, and they all have to guess what it is by asking questions, and all he can say is yes or no. So brisk means quick, expose means to present, elicit means to bring out, draw out from someone. So so he gives these answers, and it's none of these things. So I don't need to go through all of these here. That's fairly straightforward. Okay, it's none of these things here. Menagerie is a collection of animals that are kept for show. So it's none of these things that he's thinking of. And all their guesses make him laugh to the point where he's so amused that obliged he's forced to get up and stamp his feet because he's laughing so much. But finally, the plump sister guesses it. I found it out. I know what it is, Fred. I know what it is. What is it? Cried Fred. It's your Uncle Scrooge. Which it certainly was. Admiration was the universal sentiment, though some objected that the reply to "Is it a bear?" ought to have been yes, inasmuch as an answer in the negative was sufficient to have diverted their thoughts from Mr. Scrooge, supposing they had ever had any tendency that way. And so they admired the game, the fact that he thought of Scrooge. So universal sentiment means feeling. But here Dickens is being humorous when he says that when they said, "Oh, is it a bear?" he should have said yes. Okay, and because he said no, they stopped. So divert means to change direction. They stopped thinking that it might be Mr. Scrooge. And here again, Dickens is being funny by saying, well, even if they had been thought, tendency means to want to go in a certain way. Even if they had wanted to think of Mr. Scrooge, the answer to this question made them think it couldn't be Scrooge. Okay, he has given us plenty of merriment, I am sure, said Fred, and it would be ungrateful not to drink his health. Here is a glass of mulled wine ready to our hand at the moment, and I say, Uncle Scrooge. Well, Uncle Scrooge, they cried. A Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year to the old man, whatever he is, said Scrooge's nephew. He wouldn't take it from me, but may he have it nevertheless, Uncle Scrooge. Uncle Scrooge had imperceptibly become so gay and light of heart that he would have pledged the unconscious company in return and thanked them in an inaudible speech if the ghost had given him time. But the whole scene passed off in the breath of the last word spoken by his nephew, and he and the spirit were again upon their travels. Much they saw, and far they went, and many homes they visited, but always with a happy end. The spirit stood beside sick beds, and they were cheerful; on foreign lands, and they were close at home; by struggling men, and they were patient in their greater hope; by poverty, and it was rich; in almshouse, hospital, and jail; in misery's every refuge, where vain man, in his little brief authority, had not made fast the door, and barred the spirit out, he left his blessing, and taught Scrooge his precepts. So here, Fred says, oh, he's given us plenty of fun. In other words, because of the game they've just played. So let's drink his health. And they do. And he says, a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year to the old man, whatever he is. So obviously, this is referring back to the game that whatever kind of animal or person he is, we're going to wish him anyway. And when he says he wouldn't take it from me, he means he wouldn't accept the Merry Christmas and the Happy New Year when the nephew went to visit him, but the nephew is going to give it to him anyway. In other words, these greetings. So imperceptible is when something happens so slowly and gradually you don't notice it, a bit like the minute hand of a clock, for example. So slowly, slowly, without even realizing it, he has become happy and light-hearted, and that means uh, to promise or to kind of toast back. So he would have said Merry Christmas and Happy New Year to everybody in return and thanked them. Inaudible means something you can't hear. So even though he knows they wouldn't hear him, he would have given a thank you speech, but the ghost doesn't give him time. So this sentence here means that before he knows it, as soon as the nephew stops speaking, they leave. The ghost takes him, the spirit takes him, and they're traveling again. And here in one paragraph, Dickens summarizes many other places now that they go to. So they go far and wide and they visit all these different places and homes, but always with a happy ending. So when they stand by sick beds, the people become cheerful. The people probably don't realize why they become cheerful. It's the presence of the spirit that they can't see, but they suddenly feel cheerful. And in foreign lands, the people who are abroad, they suddenly feel as though they're at home. The spirit works its magic and makes them feel. So if they're feeling homesick, they suddenly feel as though they're home. If the men are struggling that they visit, those men become more patient and more hopeful. If they're in poverty, they become rich, but not maybe not necessarily literally, but they feel maybe richer. They feel a bit more hopeful. This means a charity house, hospital, and jail. So all the places where people might be miserable, the spirit refuge is where a place where you can rest. They visit, and this last line is a bit confusing. They're saying they visit every person who has not shut their heart. So this made fast the door means closing the door, but they're talking Dickens is talking metaphorically, the door of their heart. So people who have not shut out the Spirit or Jesus Christ or Christianity or religion or God or whatever, obviously in those days in this country, most people would have been Christian. So as long as they haven't shut out the Spirit in their hearts, the Spirit visits them, gives them his blessing. And by doing all of these things and everything in this whole chapter, he teaches Scrooge his precepts. So precepts are rules, general rules that are meant to be followed by people, by everybody. And the reason why they should be followed by everybody is because they are good rules. Okay. So being good and kind and that kind of thing. Okay, so what we're going to do is I'm going to stop there. We're not actually finished. There is a little bit more to do, but I don't want to rush it. And also, we still have to do the summary and the questions and so on. So I think if we stop here, it's a good point. And in the next video, we will definitely finish this stave. We'll do a summary and look at some key quotations, the usual thing. So I'll just end on this slide. As always, please do subscribe if you found this video useful and tell all your friends about it. And see you in the next video, which will be definitely the last one for Stave 3. And we're getting there because Stave 3 is the longest one. Stave 4 is still quite long, but not that long. And then Stave 4 is actually very, very short. So see you in the next video.